When a man throws someone off a bridge to hide his darkest secret, he doesn't notice the 13-year-old boy watching from the shadows. In a heartbeat, the boy dives into the river, setting off a chain of events fueled by bravery, betrayal, and a truth powerful enough to destroy lives. The sun sank lower on the horizon, painting the gently flowing river with hues of gold and amber. 13-year-old Elliot crouched in the tall reeds, his fishing rod propped against a weathered rock. This secluded spot was his sanctuary, a place where the relentless noise of life at home was muffled by the rhythmic hum of cicadas and the occasional ripple of a fish breaking the surface. The earthy scent of damp soil mixed with the crisp tang of the river filled his lungs as he inhaled deeply, cherishing the rare tranquility. Since his father's tragic death in a factory accident 5 years earlier, Elliot's mother, Nina, had worked tirelessly as a nurse to keep their modest household afloat. Their small two-bedroom home, with its peeling wallpaper and worn-out furniture, bore little resemblance to the dreams Nina once held for her son. For Elliot, fishing was more than a pastime. It was a necessity. A good catch meant dinner that stretched their limited grocery budget just a bit further. Today, however, the river was stubborn. The fishing line remained taut, refusing to yield. Yet, Elliot didn't mind. The stillness of the river was its own reward, offering a brief respite from the pressures of his young life. That peace shattered suddenly. A loud thud echoed across the water, snapping him to attention. Instinctively, Elliot ducked lower into the bushes, his heart thundering in his chest. Through the leaves, he spotted a black sedan parked mid-span on the old bridge upstream. "What the heck?" he whispered under his breath. The car door swung open, and a shadowy figure stepped out, moving deliberately toward the railing. Elliot squinted, trying to make sense of the scene. His breath hitched as the figure leaned over and pushed someone off the edge. The resulting splash sent a chill coursing down his spine. The sedan roared to life and sped away, its tires screeching and leaving only a ghostly echo behind. Elliot's gaze darted to the water, scanning desperately for any sign of what had been thrown in. Then he saw it, a hand, pale and motionless, drifting with the current. Panic gripped him. His first instinct was to run for help, but time was slipping away. The river moved fast, and whoever was in the water wouldn't last long. "Come on, Elliot," he muttered, his voice shaky but determined. He kicked off his sneakers, abandoned his rod, and sprinted down the muddy bank. Sharp rocks bit into his bare feet, but he paid them no mind. By the time he reached the river's edge, the figure was already being carried farther downstream. Without hesitation, Elliot plunged into the icy water. The cold was a jarring shock, and the current was more powerful than it seemed from the shore. For a brief, terrifying moment, he flailed, his limbs fighting to find rhythm against the pull of the river. Then he spotted the figure again, an older man, face ashen, floating lifelessly. "Hold on!" Elliot shouted, even though he knew the man couldn't hear him. Muscles burning and lungs screaming, Elliot forced himself through the churning water, inching closer until finally he grasped the man's arms. The man's weight threatened to drag them both under, and a surge of fear clawed at Elliot's resolve. "No," he growled through clenched teeth. Summoning every ounce of strength, he kicked hard against the current, fighting his way to the shore. His fingers scraped against the muddy bank, and with a final desperate push, he hauled the man onto the grass before collapsing beside him, gasping for breath. Lying on his back, Elliot stared at the twilight sky, now streaked with fiery shades of orange and pink. It felt like an eternity before he turned his attention to the man he'd pulled from the water. The stranger appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair plastered to his head and a face marked by weariness. A deep gash marred his temple, blood trickling down his cheek. Elliot's stomach churned at the sight, but his gaze locked onto the faint rise and fall of the man's chest. "He's alive!" Elliot whispered, his voice trembling with relief, but just barely. The man's breaths were shallow, his body limp and unresponsive. Frantically, Elliot patted his pockets, searching for his phone, only to realize he'd left it behind in his haste. The nearest hospital was over an hour away, and even if he found help, it might come too late. Elliot's mind raced. He couldn't leave the man here. Night was closing in, and the riverbank would soon teem with wildlife. Resolving quickly, he muttered, "I'm taking you home." The wooden door creaked loudly as Elliot staggered inside, bearing the elderly man's weight on his thin shoulders. Nina, busy scrubbing a pot in the kitchen, turned at the sound of his hurried footsteps. Her expression shifted from curiosity to alarm as her gaze landed on the unconscious man slumped against her son. "Elliot, what?" she began, her voice sharp with worry. Dropping the pot into the sink with a clatter, she rushed over. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I found him," Elliot gasped, his chest heaving. His words hung in the air as Nina's eyes darted between her son and the stranger, the gravity of the situation sinking in. In the river. Someone threw him off the bridge. Nina's voice cracked with disbelief, her breath catching in her throat. She hesitated briefly before rushing to grab the stranger's other arm, helping Elliot lower him onto their tattered, faded sofa. "Why didn't you call someone?" she demanded, her tone sharp with panic. "My phone. I left it back at the river," Elliot stammered, his chest heaving. "The hospital's too far. I didn't know what else to do." Nina's gaze lingered on the man, his pallid face stark against the dim light of the living room. His drenched clothes clung to his fragile frame, his body unnervingly still. She took a small step back, shaking her head as if to clear it. "This is serious, Elliot. We need to call for help." "No!" Elliot blurted, his voice loud and pleading. "We can't wait. He's alive, but barely. Please, Mum, you can help him." Nina hesitated, her eyes flickering between her son's desperation and the stranger's fragile form. After a tense moment, she let out a sharp sigh of resignation. "Fine, move aside." Grabbing the first aid kit from a nearby cabinet, Nina knelt beside the man. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking his pulse and lifting his eyelids. "His pulse is weak," she murmured, her voice calm but tense. Pulling a towel from the arm of a chair, she began wiping the blood from the gash on his temple. "Elliot, get me some clean water," she instructed. Without hesitation, Elliot scrambled to the kitchen, returning moments later with a bowl of water. Nina dipped the towel in and gently dabbed at the man's wound. "This is deep," she muttered under her breath. "He'll need stitches, but we'll have to make do for now." As she worked, her sharp eyes noticed bruises circling the man's wrists, as if they'd been bound, and dark discolorations along his ribs. Her lips pressed into a firm line, worry etched into her face. "Mum, is he going to be okay?" Elliot asked, his voice small and tentative. Nina didn't look up. "I don't know," she admitted, dabbing antiseptic on the cut. Her voice softened slightly as she added, "Now, tell me exactly what happened." Elliot shifted uneasily, his gaze darting away. "I was fishing by the river when I saw someone throw him off the bridge." Nina froze mid-motion, his words cutting through the air. She turned to face him, her expression a mix of shock and alarm. "Did you see who it was?" "No," Elliot said, shaking his head. "I was too far away, but I saw a car stop on the bridge. Someone got out and just threw him over." Nina's hands trembled for a fraction of a second before she steadied them again. "You're sure about this?" "Yes," Elliot said, his voice resolute. "It was a black sedan. It sped off right after." Nina let out a slow breath, her features tightening with unease. "What have you gotten us into, Elliot?" Elliot swallowed hard. "I didn't think about that, Mum. I couldn't let him drown." Nina didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on securing a bandage around the man's head. Finally, she spoke. "We'll keep him stable for now. Once he wakes up, we'll figure out what to do." That evening, the room was steeped in an uneasy quiet. The man lay on a makeshift cot on the floor, his breathing shallow but steady. The flickering glow of the old TV cast long shadows across the room as the evening news droned in the background. Elliot sat hunched on the couch, poking at his untouched plate of food. Nina leaned forward in her seat, her arms crossed as her eyes darted between the man and the screen. "Breaking news tonight," the anchor announced, drawing their attention. Victor Hale, a prominent billionaire and philanthropist, has been reported missing. Hale, known for his extensive charity work and leadership at the Hale Foundation, was last seen leaving his estate early this morning. Elliot froze, his fork suspended mid-air. "Mom!" "Shh!" Nina hissed, her gaze glued to the screen. The news report continued, accompanied by a photograph of an older man with sharp, distinguished features and silver hair. Authorities say his car was discovered abandoned near the Riverway Bridge earlier today, raising concerns of foul play. A large-scale search is currently underway. Anyone with information is urged to contact local authorities immediately. Nina turned slowly toward the man on the floor, her stomach twisting. She studied his face, now clean of blood, and felt a chill as the resemblance hit her like a punch. "It's him," she whispered, the words barely audible. "You mean?" Elliot's voice trailed off, his eyes wide. "The billionaire," Nina said, her voice trembling. "That man in our house is Victor Hale." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the realization bearing down on them like a storm cloud. "What do we do now?" Elliot finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nina stood, her face set with determination. "We wait. If he wakes up, we need answers. Until then, no one, absolutely no one, can know he's here." "But what if the people who hurt him come looking?" Elliot's voice wavered. Nina's jaw tightened as she glanced at the man once more. "Then we'll deal with that when it comes." Nina placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her eyes locking onto his with quiet resolve. "We'll handle it, if it comes to that," she said softly. But this just got a lot more complicated. "Do you think Elliot made the right choice, bringing the man home instead of contacting the police? Could his boldness lead to unexpected consequences? Let us know your thoughts below. And if you're curious about how this unfolds, don't forget to like this video and stay tuned. The first stirrings of life came as the pale light of dawn broke through the windows. Elliot, curled up in an armchair beside the makeshift cot, had dozed off, his head resting awkwardly on his arm. Meanwhile, Nina busied herself in the kitchen, the gentle clatter of pots and pans filling the air. A low groan interrupted the quiet morning, jolting Elliot awake. "Mom! He's waking up!" Elliot shot to his feet as Victor shifted, his expression twisting in pain. Nina rushed over, dropping to her knees beside the cot. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked gently. Victor's eyelids fluttered, and his gaze drifted around the room, unfocused and hazy. His lips moved, but no words came out at first. Finally, in a hoarse whisper, he asked, "Where am I?" "You're safe," Nina reassured him, her voice calm. My son found you by the river. You were hurt. Victor blinked slowly, his brows knitting together as though he were piecing together a puzzle. He reached up with a trembling hand, gingerly touching the bandage on his head before wincing. The river, he murmured, his voice strained. You need to rest, Nina said firmly, adjusting the blanket around him. No, wait. Victor's voice grew a little stronger, though it was still slurred. What happened to me? You don't remember? Elliot asked, stepping closer, his face a mixture of concern and curiosity. Victor's eyes locked onto Elliot's, confusion clouding his expression. No, I can't. I don't. His voice faltered and his head fell back onto the pillow, his strength momentarily spent. Later that morning, Victor sat propped up against a pile of soft cushions, a cup of weak tea warming his hands. Though his fingers trembled slightly, the warmth seemed to steady him. Elliot hovered nearby, his gaze fixed on Victor, brimming with silent questions. Did you save me? Victor asked suddenly, his voice steadier now but tinged with uncertainty. Elliot nodded quickly. Yeah, I pulled you out of the river. You were floating, barely breathing. Victor's grip on the cup tightened, his knuckles turning white as his eyes dropped to the tea. The river, he muttered, staring into the liquid as though it might hold answers. You don't remember how you got there? Nina asked, sitting across from him. He shook his head slowly. It's blurry. I remember driving. There was a car. Another car. His words faltered as his face contorted with pain, the memories surfacing in jagged fragments. I don't know. I saw someone throw you off the bridge, Elliot blurted out. Victor's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. What? There was a black sedan, Elliot said, his voice trembling slightly. It stopped in the middle of the bridge. Someone got out and then... He hesitated before finishing. They threw you over. Victor leaned back, his face ashen, his breathing growing labored. Nina quickly intervened. Elliot, that's enough for now. He needs time. Elliot hesitated, clearly frustrated, but nodded reluctantly and stepped back. It's okay, Victor murmured after a moment, his voice quieter, steadier. He glanced at Elliot, his lips twitching into the faintest smile. Thank you for saving me. Over the next day, Victor regained some of his strength, though his memories remained fragmented. Nina prepared light meals for him, fussing over his condition despite his protests, that he was fine. Elliot, however, spent every free moment by Victor's side, his curiosity bubbling over in a stream of questions. Do you remember your name yet? Elliot asked one afternoon, leaning forward with eager anticipation. Victor hesitated, his brow furrowing. Victor Greaves, he said slowly, as though testing the words. Wait, Elliot said, his eyes widening. Like the guy on the news. Nina, folding laundry nearby, shot Elliot a sharp glance. Elliot, don't push. It's fine, Victor said, waving a hand dismissively. He turned to Elliot, his lips curving into a small smile. The news, huh? What are they saying? Elliot hesitated. They said you were missing, that they found your car near the bridge. Victor exhaled heavily, his shoulders slumping. So they know I'm gone. Good. Why is that good? Elliot asked, his curiosity undeterred. Victor gave him a measured look, his faint smile returning. You ask a lot of questions, don't you? Elliot shrugged. I just want to know. For a long moment, Victor said nothing, then leaned forward slightly. Because it means they're looking for me. And when the right people find me, we'll set things straight." "What things?" Elliot pressed, his brows furrowing. But Victor didn't answer. By the third day, he was moving around the house with a slight limp, his strength returning slowly but surely. One afternoon, as Elliot sat on the porch practicing his fishing knots, Victor lowered himself into a chair nearby, watching him closely. "You like fishing, huh?" Victor asked, his voice calm and curious. The river stretched out before them, its gentle current reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Elliot sat on the edge of the dock, his fishing pole resting lazily in his hands. "Yeah," he murmured without lifting his gaze. "It's peaceful out here. Sometimes I even catch dinner." Victor leaned back in his chair, nodding thoughtfully. "I used to fish at your age. My father taught me. He always said it was the best way to clear your head." Elliot glanced up, his brow furrowed in surprise. "You? I don't know. You don't seem like the fishing type." "Oh?" Victor arched an eyebrow. "And what type do I seem like?" Elliot shrugged, his lips curling into a half smile. "Someone who'd have people do that kind of stuff for you." Victor let out a laugh, deep and unguarded, a sound that startled them both. "Well, you're not entirely wrong." He gestured vaguely at himself. "Haven't picked up a rod in years, but I wasn't always this." "What were you before?" Elliot asked, curiosity flickering in his dark eyes. Victor's smile dimmed, his gaze drifting to the river. "A kid trying to figure things out, just like you." For a moment, Elliot saw a side of Victor that was unguarded and raw, a glimpse into a life that had known struggles, missteps, and perseverance. "Thanks again," Victor said softly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "For saving me. It means more than you know." Elliot grinned, his tone light. "You already said that. Doesn't mean I can't say it again," Victor replied, his smile returning, though his eyes lingered on the horizon as if weighed down by unspoken thoughts. The morning air in the house was heavy, thick with tension that swirled like an unspoken storm. Victor sat on the couch, his fingers absently rubbing his temple. Nina poured him another cup of tea, her sharp eyes never leaving him, searching for any clue to his inner turmoil. Elliot sat cross-legged on the floor, shifting uneasily, as though sensing the charged energy in the room. Finally, Victor broke the silence. "I remember now," he said, his voice steady but shadowed with an edge of something darker. Nina froze mid-pour, her grip tightening around the teapot. "What do you remember?" Victor took a deep breath, setting his cup down with a trembling hand. "The bridge, the man who threw me over." His gaze locked onto hers, sharp and unyielding. "It was Alan, my son-in-law." Elliot's jaw dropped. "Your son-in-law," he repeated, incredulous. Victor's expression hardened, his jaw clenched. "He's married to my daughter, Sophia. I trusted him, gave him access to everything. My finances, my foundation, my estate. All of it." Nina crossed her arms, her brows knitting together. "Why would he do something like that? What kind of man tries to kill his own father-in-law?" "Greed," Victor said bitterly, his voice heavy with anger and betrayal. "That's what drives men like Alan." He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly, his words cutting through the room like a blade. "For years, I let Alan handle my affairs. I thought I was helping Sophia, giving her a secure future. But then I started noticing discrepancies. At first they seemed small, missing funds, inflated invoices. But when I looked deeper, his voice trailed off, his face darkening. "What did you find?" Elliot asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor's voice trembled with restrained fury. I found that Alan had been siphoning money for years, setting up shell companies, falsifying transactions, using my money to fund his ventures. Luxury properties, cars, things Sophia didn't know a thing about. Nina's eyes widened. And you confronted him? Victor nodded grimly. I called him to my study late one night. I wanted to give him a chance to come clean. But when I laid out the evidence, he snapped. Accused me of trying to destroy his life, his marriage, said I was jealous of him. Elliot frowned. That doesn't make any sense. No, Victor said bitterly. But to Alan, it didn't have to. He lost control, started shouting, throwing things, and then his voice faltered as his hand drifted to the bandage on his temple. He attacked me. I tried to fight back, but he overpowered me. Next thing I knew, I was in his car. And then his words failed him, his eyes haunted. The bridge, Nina finished quietly, her voice tight. Victor nodded slowly, his gaze distant. He must have thought I was dead when he threw me over. He didn't count on someone like Elliot being there. Elliot straightened, a mix of pride and unease flashing across his face. But what about Sophia? She doesn't know, does she? Victor shook his head. No, she loves him. Or at least she thinks she does. She has no idea what kind of man he really is. The room fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the hum of the ceiling fan. Nina stood by the window, peering out into the morning light as though expecting Alan to appear at any moment. We can't keep this quiet, she said at last, her voice firm as she turned to Victor. This was attempted murder. We have to go to the police. Victor's posture stiffened, his hands gripping the sofa's armrests. Not yet. Not yet, Nina repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. What do you mean, not yet? That man tried to kill you. He could come back to finish what he started. I know that, Victor retorted sharply, his tone rising for the first time before he caught himself. He exhaled heavily, brushing a hand through his silver-streaked hair. But if I go to the police now, unprepared, Garrett will deny everything. He's got connections, resources. He'll spin this so it looks like I'm the liar. Nina crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. So what's your grand plan? Just sit here and hope he doesn't track you down? No, Victor said firmly, his voice steady with determination. I need time. Time to gather evidence, to make sure Garrett can't worm his way out of this. I have documents, records, everything that proves what he's done, but they're at my house, locked in my office. And how exactly do you plan on getting them? Nina challenged. I don't know yet, Victor admitted, the weight of his situation dragging his shoulders down. But until I do, I can't go to the police. Nina let out a heavy sigh, her expression a mixture of frustration and concern. Victor, I get it. But my son comes first. If Garrett finds out you're here. Her gaze flicked to Elliot, who sat silently, his wide eyes darting between the two adults. I can't risk putting my family in danger. I won't let that happen, Victor said quickly. I'll leave if I have to, but please, just give me a couple of days to figure this out. Nina hesitated, her instincts as a mother clashing with her empathy. After a moment, she nodded reluctantly, her lips pressed into a grim line. You have 2 days, Victor, but after that, we go to the police, with or without your evidence. Fair enough, Victor said quietly, though the tight set of his jaw betrayed his anxiety. Elliot looked between them, his young face unusually serious. If you need help, I can— No, Nina interrupted sharply, her tone brooking no argument. You've done enough, Elliot. You saved his life, but this isn't your fight. But Mom? No buts, she said firmly. Victor stepped in, placing a reassuring hand on Elliot's shoulder. Your mom's right. You've already done more for me than I could ever repay. Leave the rest to us. Elliot frowned but nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor in reluctant agreement. That night, the house fell into an uneasy silence. Victor sat by the window, staring into the darkened street, Nina's words echoing in his mind. He couldn't fault her for being cautious. Garrett was dangerous, more dangerous than Nina or Elliot could truly comprehend. But one thing was certain, Garrett wouldn't get away with this. Across town, Garrett Hale paced the sleek floor of his office, his usually controlled demeanor unraveling. The report from the private investigator he'd hired was troubling, deeply troubling. The river search team had come up empty. This doesn't make sense, Garrett muttered, running a hand through his meticulously styled hair. He spun to face with the investigator, a wiry man clutching a thick folder. It's possible he survived, the investigator ventured cautiously. The current wasn't very strong that night. Someone could have pulled him out. Garrett's lips curled into a sneer. Someone? Who? That area is practically deserted. Did you find anything? Anyone? The investigator hesitated before replying. There was a boy, a local kid. A witness reported seeing him near the bridge that evening, but we don't have a name yet. We're looking into it. Garrett's fists clenched as his mind raced. Find him, he barked, and whoever else might be involved, handle this quietly, no loose ends. Understood, sir, the investigator said, retreating toward the door. As the man left, Garrett poured himself a drink. His hand trembled slightly as he brought the glass to his lips. If Victor was alive, it wasn't just embezzlement on the line. Attempted murder would see him locked away for life. Garrett couldn't allow that to happen. Elliot noticed the car for the first time on his way home from school. A sleek, black vehicle was parked just down the street from his house. At first, it seemed unremarkable, just another car. But when it appeared again the next day, parked in the exact same spot, unease began to creep in. Mom, do we know anyone who drives a black car? Elliot asked that evening as Nina prepared dinner. She paused, her knife hovering mid-air. Why do you ask? I've seen one parked down the street a couple of times. It just sits there. No one gets out. Nina's face darkened, her instincts flaring. Elliot, listen to me. If you see that car again, don't go near it. Come straight home. Do you understand? Yes, Mom, Elliot replied, his voice subdued. Nina moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The street lay quiet, but her gut told her something was amiss. She glanced back at Victor, who sat in the corner, lost in thought, his face a mask of quiet determination. Victor sat silently, his face drawn with tension as Nina spoke. Victor, she said, her voice steady but laced with worry. Could Garrett have his people looking for you? His head jerked up, his expression dark and unreadable. If he knows I'm alive, he replied grimly, then yes, he'll stop at nothing to find me. Nina's protective instincts kicked in, her resolve hardening. Elliot, you're staying indoors from now on, unless I'm with you. No exceptions. Elliot started to protest. But, Mom... She cut him off firmly, her tone leaving no room for debate. No exceptions, she repeated. Resentful but understanding the gravity of her command, Elliot nodded, though unease coiled in his stomach. He hated feeling like a helpless child, but the look in her eyes told him there was no room for negotiation. The next day, that unease followed Elliot like a shadow. At school, he caught himself glancing over his shoulder more than once, his nerves fraying with every passing hour. By the time the final bell rang, he was desperate to get home, choosing his usual shortcut through a quiet, tree-lined side street. The late afternoon light cast long shadows, and the street was eerily still. Halfway down the block, a sleek black car glided past him, slowing just enough to set off alarm bells in his head. Elliot froze, his pulse hammering in his ears. The car stopped a short distance ahead, and the driver's door creaked open. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his eyes scanning the area before locking onto Elliot. "Hey, kid," the man called, his tone unnervingly casual. "Got a second?" Every instinct in Elliot's body screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. I gotta get home," he stammered, stepping back hesitantly. The man's smile was sharp, predatory, and it didn't reach his eyes. "It'll just take a second. Come here." Elliot shook his head, his fear spilling over. "No," he whispered, turning to flee, but another man appeared behind him, cutting off his escape. "Easy, kid," the second man said, his voice low and dangerous. "We just want to talk." Panic surged like a tidal wave, and without a plan, Elliot darted to the left, squeezing through a narrow gap between two fences. Behind him, shouts erupted, followed by the thunder of footsteps. Elliot's lungs burned as he sprinted down the alley, zigzagging to throw off his pursuers. Up ahead, a rusted dumpster loomed, and he threw himself behind it, pressing into the cold, grimy metal. He clapped a hand over his mouth, trying to muffle his ragged breaths as the men's voices closed in. "Where'd he go?" one barked. "Check the alley." Elliot's heart pounded so loudly he thought they might hear it. He squeezed his eyes shut, praying they wouldn't find him. The seconds stretched agonizingly long until finally the footsteps receded. "He's gone. Let's get back to the car," one of them muttered. Elliot stayed hidden, his body trembling until he was sure they were gone. Only then did he emerge, his legs wobbly and unsteady beneath him. Somehow, he managed to run all the way home, bursting through the front door and collapsing onto the floor in a heap. "Elliot!" Nina cried, rushing to his side. "What happened?" They tried to grab me," he gasped, his voice trembling. Nina's face went white as she looked to Victor, who was already on his feet, his jaw clenched. "Garrett's men," Victor said, his tone clipped. It wasn't a question. "This has gone too far," Nina said, her voice a mix of fury and fear. Her hands shook as she crossed her arms, glaring at Victor, as if willing him to offer a solution. Victor sat at the kitchen table, his face etched with worry, as he sifted through a worn notebook Nina had handed him. Elliot watched him from across the table, his young face pale but determined. Nina stood nearby, arms crossed, her concern palpable. "Are you sure you remember everything?" she asked softly. "I don't have much choice," Victor replied, his pen pausing mid-scribble. "Garrett was careless, but I need to make sure I've got all the pieces before I hand this over." He rubbed his temples, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. There were unauthorized transfers, offshore accounts, and sums that didn't add up. I flagged them all before he came after me. Nina's brow furrowed. "And those records, they're in your office." Victor nodded. "Locked in a safe. If we can get them, it's enough to bury him." How?" Elliot asked, his voice tentative. "Won't Garrett have people watching your place?" "He will," Victor admitted, his face grim. "That's why we'll need help." That evening, Nina made a call. Half an hour later, her brother Liam arrived. A retired detective with a sharp eye and quiet confidence, Liam took in the tense atmosphere with a single sweep of the room. "What's going on, Nina?" he asked, his voice steady. His gaze shifted to Victor, lingering briefly. "This is Victor," Nina began, her tone serious. "He's in trouble, big trouble, and we need your help." As Nina and Victor recounted the events of the past few days, Liam listened intently, his expression darkening with every word. "Let me get this straight," he said finally, leaning forward. "Garrett embezzled money, tried to kill you, and now he's got people hunting you down?" "Exactly," Victor confirmed. "And I've got the proof to take him down, but it's locked in my house. I can't go back there alone." Liam stroked his chin in contemplation. "Here's the plan," he began firmly. "First, I'll reach out to some of my old contacts to keep an eye on the house. If Garrett has anyone watching, we'll find out. Second, I'll help you devise a way to retrieve those documents without being caught." Nina's voice wavered as she asked, "And Elliot?" Liam nodded reassuringly. "I'll make sure he's safe." He turned his gaze toward Elliot, who sat quietly, but with a fire of resolve in his eyes. "You got courage, kid, but leave the dangerous parts to us, all right?" Elliot gave a reluctant nod, his determination unshaken despite the warning. The next day, Nina and Victor prepared in the dimly lit living room, a digital recorder set between them on the coffee table. The plan was fraught with risks, but it was their best shot at buying time to gather the evidence they needed. Nina adjusted the microphone and asked, "Are you sure about this?" Her tone carried both doubt and hope. Victor gave a steady nod. "It's the only way to pressure Alan without revealing my location. If he thinks the public knows his secrets, he'll panic." Nina hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the record button. Then she took a deep breath and pressed it. "Whenever you're ready," she said. Clearing his throat, Victor began. His voice was steady but laced with suppressed anger. "My name is Victor Hale. If you're hearing this, it means I survived an attempt on my life by Alan Kane, my son-in-law. For years, I entrusted him with my finances and my family, believing he cared for my daughter's well-being. But I was wrong." He paused, his jaw tightening as the weight of betrayal washed over him. "Alan has stolen millions from me, laundering it through my accounts to fund illegal enterprises. When I confronted him, he tried to kill me, pushing me off the Riverway Bridge, but I survived." His tone hardened as he added, "And I have the evidence to prove his guilt." Nina motioned subtly for him to wrap it up. Turning to the camera, Victor concluded with icy resolve. To Alan, "You may think you've won, but the truth is coming for you. Justice is inevitable." His words lingered in the room like a storm cloud as Nina stopped the recording and exhaled sharply. "That should do it," she murmured. Elliot stepped into the room, his youthful face a mixture of curiosity and concern. "What are we going to do with it?" he asked. Victor glanced at him with a determined look. "We'll send it anonymously to a journalist I trust, someone who can release it without revealing our location." Nina nodded in agreement. "And while Alan scrambles to control the fallout, we'll use the distraction to retrieve the evidence from the house." Later that evening, Liam returned, his face grim. "Alan's men are watching the house, but they're sloppy. We can work around them," he reported. Victor nodded firmly. "Good. Then we move tonight." "Tonight?" Nina's eyes widened in alarm. "Isn't that too soon?" "The longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes," Victor replied. "We've already taken a huge risk with that recording. Momentum is on our side." Liam placed a comforting hand on Nina's shoulder. "I'll make sure everyone stays safe. Trust me." Meanwhile, Elliot sat quietly, his heart pounding. The gravity of their situation was undeniable. This wasn't just about saving Victor anymore. It was about all of their survival. Miles away, Garrett Kane stormed into his sleek office, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. The anonymous video message from Victor played on the screen, looping like a haunting refrain. each word sliced through the veneer of his carefully crafted life. "How is this possible?" he bellowed, slamming his fist on the polished oak desk. "He should be dead!" Colton, Garrett's chief enforcer, stood rigid in the corner, his burly frame brimming with unease. "We're tracking him," he said evenly, though his tone betrayed the tension beneath. "The broadcast originated near Riverway. We've narrowed it down to a handful of neighborhoods." Garrett's glare could cut steel. "A handful of neighborhoods," he growled. "That's not good enough. I want this handled tonight. Find him and make sure he doesn't have the chance to speak another word." Colton gave a curt nod before leaving to relay the orders. As the door closed behind him, Garrett slumped into his chair, his breathing shallow. His world was crumbling, and he knew it. If Victor was alive with evidence, the end was inevitable. That night, the quiet of Nina's street was shattered by the slow, deliberate arrival of a black SUV. Elliot peeked through the curtains, his stomach tightening at the sight. "They're here," he whispered, his voice trembling. Nina's heart raced as she immediately shut off the lights. "Elliot, take Victor and hide. Go to the crawl space under the stairs and stay there until I tell you it's safe." Elliot nodded quickly, grabbing Victor's arm. "Come on," he urged in a hushed voice. Victor hesitated, his pride warring with his sense of self-preservation. "I can't let them." "Now is not the time for heroics," Nina hissed sharply. "Go!" As Elliot led Victor into the shadows, Nina turned to Liam. He was already loading an old revolver, his expression grim but focused. "Are you sure about this?" Nina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam gave a curt nod, his jaw set in determination. "They're not walking out of here with him. Stay behind me." A thunderous crash reverberated through the house as the front door gave way under the force of a brutal kick. Splintered wood flew across the floor as three men stormed in, their expressions steely and full of menace. "Where is he?" the leader barked, his voice cutting through the tense air like a knife. Nina stepped forward, her heart hammering in her chest, though she held her head high. "Get out of my house." The leader sneered, an arrogant smirk playing across his lips. "Lady, you're in over your head. Hand him over, and no one gets hurt." Liam stepped into the room, his revolver raised, its barrel pointed squarely at the leader's chest. "Looks like you brought the trouble with you. Now get out." The smirk faded as the leader hesitated, motioning to his men with a sharp nod. "Find him," he growled. The intruders fanned out, ransacking the house with reckless abandon, tossing furniture and flinging open closet doors. Nina's breath hitched as one of the men moved toward the stairs. "Hey!" she yelled, grabbing a lamp from a side table and hurling it with all her strength. The lamp shattered against the man's shoulder, causing him to stagger back. Before he could recover, Liam fired a warning shot into the air. "That's enough!" he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The next one won't miss." The leader raised his hands, a sly grin reappearing on his face. "All right, old man. No need to get trigger-happy." The tension in the room crackled like a live wire until Colton emerged from the hallway, dragging Elliot from a hidden crawl space. Elliot's face was pale with fear, his arm caught in Colton's iron grip. "Found the kid," Colton said with a sinister chuckle. Nina's blood turned ice cold. "Let him go!" she screamed. Colton's laugh deepened. "Not a chance, not until we get what we came for." A firm, commanding voice cut through the room. "I'm right here." Everyone turned as Victor stepped into the room, his face calm but resolute. Nina's eyes widened in shock. "Victor, no!" Victor raised his hands, his gaze steady on the leader. "Let the boy go. This is between me and Garrett. Colton shoved Elliot toward Nina, who caught him and pulled him into a protective embrace. "Smart man," Colton said, stepping toward Victor. But before he could lay a hand on him, Liam fired again, the bullet grazing Colton's arm. "Back off!" Liam snarled. Chaos erupted. The men lunged at Liam and Nina, sparking a violent scuffle in the cramped living room. In the midst of the mayhem, Victor grabbed a fire poker and swung it with desperate strength, striking one of the intruders and knocking him to the ground. "Let's go!" the leader shouted, realizing the tide had turned against them. He and his men retreated, dragging a wounded Colton with them as they disappeared into the night. Liam locked the door behind them, his breathing ragged. "Is everyone okay?" Nina asked, her voice trembling as she clutched Elliot tightly. Elliot nodded shakily, his small hands gripping her shirt. Victor placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "You were brave, kid. Thank you." The next morning, Liam called in a favor from an old contact in law enforcement, handing over a meticulously compiled folder of evidence. "This has to be airtight," he said firmly. "No leaks. Garrett can't see this coming." By midday, a police raid descended upon Garrett's sprawling estate. Officers uncovered a trove of incriminating evidence, enough to secure charges of embezzlement and attempted murder. Cameras flashed as Garrett was escorted from his mansion in handcuffs, his usual smug expression replaced by a furious glare. "This is ridiculous," Garrett shouted at the reporters crowding his driveway. "I've done nothing wrong." But as damning evidence mounted, bank records, anonymous videos, and Victor's testimony, his defiant protests crumbled. That evening, Elliot, Nina, and Victor sat in tense silence as the news broadcast Garrett being led into the courthouse. "They got him," Elliot whispered, a note of relief in his voice. Victor nodded solemnly, though the weight of the ordeal still lingered in his expression. "It's not over yet. He'll fight this with everything he's got, but at least the truth is out." Nina placed a gentle hand on his arm, her voice soft but resolute. "And now, he can't hurt us anymore." Victor allowed a faint smile, the first in weeks. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, for the first time, the flicker of hope felt tangible. Justice, though slow and grueling, was within reach. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the judge entered, bringing the room to order. Garrett sat rigid at the defense table, his face betraying no emotion, though his piercing gaze seemed to chill the air. Across the aisle, Victor met his cold stare with unshaken determination, seated at the prosecution's table. Without delay, the prosecution launched into their case, meticulously unraveling Garrett's tangled web of deceit. Charts, spreadsheets, and damning emails illuminated screens, each piece of evidence exposing fraudulent companies, falsified transactions, and millions siphoned from Victor's accounts. Day one painted Garrett as the architect of a brazen scheme. On the second day, the drama heightened as Victor took the stand. The prosecutor began, "Mr. Hale, could you describe your relationship with the defendant, Garrett Kane?" Adjusting his tie, Victor spoke with a steady voice that carried the weight of betrayal. "Garrett is my son-in-law. He's married to my daughter, Sophia. I trusted him, handing over control of my finances, believing he had my family's best interests in mind." "And when did you first suspect something was wrong?" the prosecutor pressed. Victor sighed, the pain evident in his expression. "About 6 months ago. I started noticing discrepancies, money missing, unusual transactions. When I confronted Garrett, he denied everything and became aggressive. That confrontation escalated. His voice trembled, but he pushed on. He attacked me, and then he tried to kill me." The courtroom froze in silence. The prosecutor leaned forward. "What did he do, Mr. Hale?" Victor's voice grew firm. "He threw me off the Riverway Bridge and left me to die." Gasps rippled through the room as Garrett's attorney leapt to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation." The judge nodded. "Sustained. The jury will disregard the witness's interpretation of intent." Victor, however, was undeterred. "If it weren't for Elliot, I wouldn't be here today." All eyes turned to the young man seated nervously in the gallery. Elliot's hands were clammy, but he rose and approached the witness stand, encouraged by his mother's reassuring nod. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor instructed. "Elliot Johnson," he replied, his voice wavering slightly. "Elliot, could you tell the court what you saw the night of Mr. Hale's attack?" Elliot stole a glance at Victor, who offered an encouraging smile. "I was fishing by the river," Elliot began. "It was quiet, and then I heard a loud crash. I looked up and saw a black car on the bridge. Someone got out, went to the railing, and threw something over." The prosecutor leaned in. "What did you see next?" Elliot swallowed hard. "A man in the water. He wasn't moving. I didn't know who it was, but I jumped in to save him." The defense attorney shot up. "Objection, Your Honor. This witness is unreliable. He was alone and it was dark. He can't identify the defendant." The prosecutor countered. "Your Honor, the witness isn't identifying the defendant. He's corroborating the sequence of events." The judge ruled, overruled. Gaining confidence, Elliot continued. "Later, I saw pictures of Mr. Hale on the news. That's when I realized he was the man I'd pulled from the river." The trial's crescendo came with the testimony of Owen Crane, Garrett's former business partner. Crane's appearance visibly rattled Garrett, whose previously calm demeanor fractured under a mask of fury. The prosecutor wasted no time. "Mr. Crane, could you describe your relationship with the defendant?" "I worked with Garrett on multiple ventures," Crane said, his tone measured. "He approached me to set up offshore accounts and shell companies to move money from Mr. Hale accounts." "Were you aware that these actions were illegal?" Crane hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but Garrett assured me no one would ever find out." "What happened when Mr. Hale confronted him?" The tension in the courtroom peaked as Crane replied, "Garrett panicked. He said he had to get rid of the problem. I didn't understand what he meant at first, but when I heard about the bridge incident," his voice broke slightly, "I knew what he'd done." "And why are you testifying now?" Crane glanced at Garrett, then turned back to the prosecutor. "Because it's the right thing to do. I can't undo what I've done, but I can make sure the truth is known." The room erupted in murmurs as the prosecution rested their case. It took the jury only 4 hours to deliberate. The foreperson stood, her face solemn as she delivered the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Garrett Kane, guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder." Garrett slumped in his seat, the arrogance he carried throughout the trial finally giving way to defeat. The judge delivered the sentence swiftly: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the gavel struck, the courtroom collectively exhaled, a mix of relief and solemnity hanging in the air. Elliot watched as Garrett was escorted away in handcuffs, his once impeccable suit now a stark reminder of his fallen empire. That evening, Elliot sat quietly on his porch, his gaze fixed on the stars above. The stillness was broken when Victor joined him, easing into the chair beside him with a soft creak. "You holding up okay, kid?" Victor asked gently. Elliot nodded, but his eyes betrayed a deeper conflict. "I thought it'd feel different," Elliot admitted, his voice subdued. "Different how?" Victor prodded. Elliot hesitated, searching for the words. I figured I'd be happy, like it was all finally over, but it's not, is it? Victor offered a faint, knowing smile. No, it's not. Things like this leave a mark. But, Elliot, what you did, it was extraordinary. You saved my life. You helped put a dangerous man where he belongs. That's no small thing. Elliot turned to Victor, his young face etched with curiosity. Do you think people like Garrett can ever really change? Victor paused before answering, his tone thoughtful. I don't know. Maybe. But what matters more is that people like you exist, the kind of person who steps up when it counts. For the first time that day, Elliot smiled, a quiet, genuine smile. The weight of the ordeal began to ease, replaced by a growing sense of pride. On a bright, crisp afternoon, weeks later, Victor Hale pulled up to Nina's modest house in a sleek but unpretentious car. This time, there was no shadow of fear trailing him, only purpose. Elliot answered the door, his surprise quickly giving way to a wide grin. Victor, he exclaimed, stepping aside to let him in. Good to see you, Elliot, Victor said warmly, clasping the boy's shoulder. Is your mum around? Nina emerged from the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands. Victor? She greeted, her tone warm, but still tinged with formality. This is a surprise. What brings you here? Victor settled onto the couch, placing an envelope on the coffee table in front of him. I wanted to thank you properly, he said, sliding the envelope toward her. Nina hesitated, eyeing it cautiously. What's this? Go on, open it, Victor urged, his smile encouraging. With slight hesitation, Nina picked up the envelope and unfolded the letter and checked inside. Her eyes widened as she took in the amount, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Victor, this is too much. It's not nearly enough, Victor replied firmly. You and Elliot saved my life. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here to see justice served. This is my way of making sure your family has what it needs. Nina's voice wavered with emotion. This is more than we've ever dreamed of. I don't know if we can accept it. Victor shook his head. It's not just money, it's an investment, and there's more. His gaze shifted to Elliot, who had been watching in stunned silence. Elliot, I've arranged for you to attend St. Gabriel's Academy. It's one of the top schools in the state. You've got a full scholarship. Everything you'll need, from books to transportation, is covered. Elliot's jaw dropped. You mean, I can really go to St. Gabriel's? Victor chuckled. For real. It's the least I can do for someone as brave as you? Nina blinked back tears, clutching the letter tightly. Victor, I don't even know what to say. Just say yes, Victor said softly, and let me do this for you. With a trembling voice, Nina nodded. Yes, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. A week later, Elliot stood in the small bedroom he shared with his younger cousin, carefully packing his new backpack for the first day at St. Gabriel's. His hands brushed over crisp notebooks and the pristine uniform folded neatly on the bed. He paused, taking a deep breath as the whirlwind of the past month washed over him, saving a life, testifying in court, and now embarking on a journey he'd never thought possible. But beyond the material changes, something deeper had shifted within him. Elliot, Nina's voice called from the hallway. Hurry up, or you'll miss the bus. Coming, Elliot shouted back, zipping up the bag. Before leaving, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. For the first time, he saw more than just a boy from a small town. He saw someone capable of making a difference, someone brave. As he walked to the bus stop, his thoughts drifted back to the bridge. to that split second when he dived into the water without hesitation. That choice had changed everything, not just for Victor, but for himself. He realized now that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about taking action, even when fear threatened to hold you back. That Saturday, Victor returned to Elliot's house holding a small gift box in his hand. Elliot was out in the backyard, fiddling with an old fishing rod he hadn't touched in weeks. "Still at it, huh?" Victor called out as he stepped onto the grass. Elliot looked up, grinning. "Yeah, this is where it all began, isn't it?" "It sure is," Victor replied with a chuckle, walking closer. He extended the box toward Elliot. "I brought you something." Curious, Elliot took the box and carefully opened it. Inside lay a custom-made fishing lure, its metal surface gleaming in the fading sunlight. His initials were etched into the surface, delicate but unmistakable. "Wow!" Elliot exclaimed, running his fingers over the intricate engraving. "This is amazing. Thanks, Victor." "You've earned it," Victor said, his tone shifting slightly, a softness entering his voice. He hesitated before continuing, his expression sincere. "Elliot, I need you to know something. You've become like family to me, the grandson I never had." Elliot felt a lump rise in his throat, but he managed a warm smile. "You're family to me too." Victor nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I'll make sure to visit often, and if you ever need anything at all, you call me. Promise?" "I will," Elliot said earnestly. Later that evening, Elliot found himself walking alone along the riverbank. The water shimmered in the dimming light, flowing steadily beneath the bridge where he now stood. He gazed down at the river that had once filled him with fear, but which now seemed tranquil, almost welcoming. This was where it all began, where his world had been turned upside down in a way he never could have predicted. His thoughts turned to the man who had tried to take Victor's life, now serving his sentence behind bars. He thought of Victor's gratitude, the connection they'd forged, and the unexpected opportunities that awaited him. But most of all, Elliot reflected on the power of a single decision. One moment of courage had not only saved Victor's life, but transformed his own. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and violet, Elliot smiled softly to himself. The river continued its relentless course, endless and unwavering, much like life itself. And Elliot? He was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Wow, what a story, right? While this tale isn't based on real events, it truly captures the essence of courage, resilience, and the power of doing what's right, even when it's the hardest thing to do. Stories like this remind us how one small act of bravery can create ripples that change lives forever. Elliot's decision to jump into the river didn't just save Victor's life, it set off a chain of events that uncovered betrayal, brought justice, and showed us that even the smallest voices can make a big difference. It's a powerful reminder that you don't have to be a superhero to be a hero. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of courage and the will to stand up for what's right. This story also shines a light on the importance of family and trust. Nina's unwavering support for her son and Victor's gratitude to those who saved him speak volumes about how compassion and kindness can bridge even the widest gaps between people. And let's not forget the valuable lesson about greed and its consequences. Garrett's choices tore apart his family and cost him everything, an important reminder that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply you try to bury it. But hey, enough from me. What did you take away from this story? Did you find Elliot's bravery inspiring? Or were you moved by Nina's selflessness? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.